Are you ready for a fun Quran quiz? Today we have prepared 100 fun and challenging questions that will put your Islamic knowledge to the test. You'll have 7 seconds to answer each question, so stay sharp. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to continue your journey of learning with us on Islam Quiz. Let's begin! What is the first surah of the Quran? Surah Al-Fatiha. How many surahs are in the Quran? $114. What is the longest surah in the Quran? Surah Al-Baqarah. How many verses are in Surah Al-Fatiha? Seven. What is the shortest surah in the Quran? Surah Al-Kawthar. In which month was the Quran revealed? Ramadan. What is the Quran written in? Arabic. What does Al-Quran mean? The recitation. Which angel brought the Quran to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Angel Jibreel. What is the last surah of the Quran? Surah Al-Nas. How many verses are in the Quran? $6,236. What is the first word revealed in the Quran? Read or اقرأ. How many juz or parts does the Quran have? $30. What is the name of the cave where the first revelation happened? Cave Hira. Which surah is called the mother of the Quran? Surah Al-Fatiha. What does Surah Al-Ikhlas talk about? The oneness of Allah. Which surah has two Bismillah? Surah Al-Naml. What does Surah Al-Fil talk about? The Elephant Army. Which surah tells the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam? Surah Yusuf. Which surah talks about the expansion of the universe? Surah Al-Dhariyat. How many prophets are mentioned in the Quran? "25." Which surah is equal to 1/3 of the Quran in reward? Surah Al-Ikhlas. What is the main theme of Surah Al-Kahf? The people of the cave. Which surah is also known as the protector from punishment in the grave? Surah Al-Mulk. What is the meaning of Ayatul Kursi? The throne verse. What surah should be recited for protection from evil? Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas. What does Surah Al-Rahman describe? The blessings of Allah. How many times is Bismillah mentioned in the Quran? "114." What surah describes the splitting of the moon? Surah Al-Qamar. Which surah is about the signs of the universe? Surah Al-Mulk. How many times is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam's name mentioned in the Quran? 4. Which of these surahs describe the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh? Surah Taha. What is the best surah to recite before sleeping for protection from the punishment of the grave? Surah Al-Mulk. What does Alif Lam Mim mean? Only Allah knows the meaning. What surah talks about the Battle of Badr? Surah Al-Anfal. Who was the first person to compile the Quran into one book? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Over how many years was the Quran revealed? "23 years." Which surah has the most names of Allah mentioned? Surah Al-Hashr. What surah tells the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam breaking idols? Surah Al-Anbiya. What is the name of the surah that talks about the Battle of Uhud? Surah Ali Imran. How many times is Prophet Musa alayhi salam mentioned in the Quran? "136 times." What surah talks about the story of Qarun? Surah Al-Qasas. Which of these surahs talks about the creation of humans? Surah Al-Alaq. Which surah was revealed completely in one night? Surah Al-An'am. What of these surahs warns about backbiting? Surah Al-Humaza. Which surah talks about the splitting of the sky on the Day of Judgment? Surah Al-Inshiqaq. What surah describes how the Quran is easy to remember? Surah Al-Qamar. How many letters are in the Quran? More than 300,000. What surah describes the rewards of patience? Surah Az-Zumar. Which surah talks about the importance of time? Surah Al-Asr. Which of these surahs talks about the blessings of gratitude? Surah Ibrahim. What surah talks about Prophet Isa alayhi salam and his miracles? Surah Maryam. What surah describes the people of the ditch? Surah Al-Buruj. What surah is known for helping in seeking guidance? Surah Al-Fatiha. What surah mentions the building of the Kaaba? Surah Al-Baqarah. What surah warns about pride and arrogance? Surah Al-Qasas. What surah is named after a woman? Surah Maryam. What surah tells about Prophet Dawood alayhi salam and his wisdom? Surah Sad. What surah tells about the blessings of water? Surah Al-Waqi'ah. What surah talks about the destruction of an entire nation by wind? Surah Al-Haqqa. What surah tells about the Prophet's night journey? Surah Al-Isra. Where was the last revelation of the Quran revealed? Arafat. What surah mentions the event of the splitting of the earth? Surah Al-Zalzala. What surah was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam when he felt sad? Surah Al-Duha. Who ordered the official compilation of the Quran in its final written form? Uthman radiallahu anhu. How many surahs start with Alif Lam Mim? Six. Who was given the Zabur according to the Quran? Prophet Dawood alayhi salam? Which of these surahs mentions the importance of parents? Surah Luqman. Which surah tells about the story of the sleepers in the cave? Surah Al-Kahf. What surah warns about hoarding wealth? Surah Al-Humazah. What will be given to the righteous on Judgment Day? Their book in the right hand. What surah is named after an elephant? Surah Al-Fil. What surah describes how Allah will protect the Quran? Surah Al-Hijr. What was the punishment of the people of Prophet Lut alayhi salam? A rain of stones. What of these surahs describes the light of Allah? Surah Al-Nur. What was Prophet Nuh's alayhi salam miracle? Building an ark. Which surah describes the blowing of the trumpet on Judgment Day? Surah Az-Zumar. What surah tells about the destruction of the people of Thamud? Surah Ash-Shams. In which surah can we find the verse that says, after hardship comes ease? Surah Al-Inshirah. Which surah describes the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Khidr? Surah Al-Kahf. Which surah was revealed for the victory of Mecca? Surah Al-Fath. What of these surahs describes the final moments of a dying person? Surah Al-Waqi'ah. Who is called Khalilullah in the Quran? Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? Which surah is named after iron? Surah Al-Hadid. What of these surah describes the actions of the hypocrites? Surah Al-Munafiqun. Which surah talks about mountains as pegs that stabilize the earth? Surah Al-Naba. What surah tells about Prophet Isa alayhi salam speaking as a baby? Surah Maryam. Which of these surahs teaches that the Quran is a healing? Surah Al-Isra. Which surah was revealed in defense of a woman who was wronged? Surah Al-Mujadila. What does the Quran compare the human embryo to? A clot of blood. Which surah describes how Allah created the sun and moon in perfect balance? Surah Ar-Rahman. What surah talks about the people of the Sabbath who were turned into apes? Surah Al-A'raf. What happened to Qarun, the wealthy man mentioned in the Quran? He was swallowed by the earth. Which of these surahs talks about the people of Madian and Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam? Surah Hud. What surah describes how Allah created everything in pairs? Surah Al-Dhariyat. What surah warns about the dangers of arrogance and power? Surah Al-Qasas. What surah describes how Allah made night for rest and day for work? Surah An-Naba. Who was sent as a test for Prophet Musa alayhi salam to gain knowledge? Khidr. Which of these surahs describe the story of a miraculous she-camel? Surah Ash-Shams. What is another name for the Quran mentioned in the Quran itself? Al-Furqan. How many did you get? Make sure to like and subscribe. Assalamu alaykum.